And we begin today with a look back. As 2013 winds down, we close the book on a year with some really big news stories. It was the year of whistleblowers and NSA secrets, a year of violent explosions both from homegrown terrorism in Boston and corporate disregard in West Texas, a year of government dysfunction, and a year in which average people around the world took to the streets to protest against the status quo, with actions against the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal, and a new community of activists rising up on behalf of Chelsea Manning, who learned her fate this year for exposing U.S. war crimes. So joining me now to discuss how these stories and more impacted 2013 are the people who brought you the stories. Here in Washington, D.C., correspondent Liz Wall, from New York, RT correspondent Anastasia Churkina, and from L.A., RT correspondent Ramon Galindo. Thank you all for being here. So I want to start with what has to be the year of the whistleblower, thanks in large part to what Edward Snowden started during the summer, revealing the secrets of the NSA. Now, I spoke with the Washington Post's Barton Gellman this week about the impact Snowden has made in such a short amount of time.
I've seldom, if ever, seen a story that has taken hold, so far and so broadly and so deeply. And if you're a whistleblower who wants attention, you can't even plausibly aspire to the impact he's had already.
And of course, we'll be hearing a lot more from Gellman thanks to Snowden in 2014. But Snowden wasn't the only whistleblower to make news this year. Liz, you were at the trial of Chelsea Manning, the former U.S. Army soldier who was accused of leaking documents to WikiLeaks. What did you learn from that trial? How did this story impact 2013?
Yeah, certainly it was a year of very high-profile leaks, namely the court-martial of Chelsea Manning, formerly known as Bradley Manning, spent a lot of time there covering the trial in Fort Meade, Maryland. Of course, he is accused of the largest leak of classified information in military history, charged with a very serious charge of aiding the enemy, in addition to a slew of other charges. In the end, the judge found him not guilty of that most serious charge of aiding the enemy, but guilty on most of the other charges. He was sentenced to 35 years behind bars. Of course, Manning, a divisive figure, some people hailing him as a hero for shining a light on government wrongdoing, others calling him a traitor for exposing government secrets. Throughout this trial, his attorney, David Coombs, tried to keep it under the radar, but did make a very public statement after that sentence was delivered in August. Here's what he had to say.
While we were successful in avoiding the aiding the enemy offense, the fact that the government pursued this offense, the fact that the government let this offense go forward even after it was clear there was no evidence of any intent to do so, should sound an alarm to every journalist. It should sound an alarm to every concerned citizen.
That was Manning's attorney there, David Coombs, arguing or kind of condemning the government for going so aggressively after Manning and overcharging him, he says, especially when it comes to this aiding the enemy charge. And he says, and what a lot of civil rights activists have argued throughout this case, is that it has had this chilling effect on the media.
And also, Chelsea Manning isn't the only whistleblower who's heading to jail. John Kiriakou was sentenced to jail. He was a CIA whistleblower. We've, in fact, had a lot of the notable whistleblowers of this year in studio. What's John Kiriakou's story? How did his story affect this?
That's right. It was actually around this time last year that he was sitting in this studio. I interviewed him right before he was about to go to jail. As you had mentioned, he's a former CIA officer, and he is also charged with leaking information to the media. Interesting thing about Kiriakou, before that happened, he was also the first CIA officer to publicly expose that torture does go on U.S. bases, Guantanamo Bay, and he brought specific attention to waterboarding, saying that this practice happens at Guantanamo Bay, and he called it torture. He used those words. Here is part of my conversation with him right before he went to prison.
The Bush administration, more specifically President Bush at the time, was lying to the American people by saying that we were not waterboarding prisoners, we were not torturing anyone, and if anyone was being tortured, it was a result of rogue officers inside the CIA.
Now, Anastasia, I want to bring you in now. As a result of what whistleblowers have done, particularly Chelsea Manning, in recent years, WikiLeaks has been able to bring to light some of the nation's darkest secrets about the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, and particularly the detention facility in Guantanamo Bay, especially with this summer's hunger strike. You were at Guantanamo Bay, Anastasia. You gave us several reports from there. What's going on down there this year?
Well, Sam, what's going on down there this year is pretty much what has been going on for since day one of Obama's presidency, when he promised to shut this place down, which has become really a permanent stain on America's image, you know, at home and abroad. And what went down there with this major hunger strike that took place earlier this year, where for over 6 months, the majority of the prison population was on hunger strike in attempts to bring some kind of attention to the fact that they are still there, because people just stopped talking about this location. Politicians kind of brushed it aside after Obama's promises to kind of put an end to this place. So we saw this kind of peak of desperation from the majority of the prison's population, over 100 people going on this major hunger strike, which so many times we've heard described as just a horrific process. And when we were there, the way officials talked to us about it was a lot more nonchalant. Take a listen.
Before it's passed down the nose, we lubricate it, and we give the patient a choice. Do they want to have lidocaine, which is an agent that will numb the area, or if they want olive oil to lubricate the tube. Most of our patients have been using olive oil. They seem to like it. In fact, some of our patients are so used to this, they will describe which nostril they want.
So, Sam and guys, you know, one of the major things we saw at Guantanamo this year was that this huge disconnect between the way officials describe this place and present it to the media, and by the countless reports of desperation, torture, and just horrid conditions and hopelessness that we've heard from prisoners throughout the years.
Anastasia, whistleblowers, hunger strikers, they didn't receive a lot of attention from the mainstream networks, but the Boston Marathon bombing was wall-to-wall coverage. It was a huge story this year. You were in Boston right after the bombing in what ended up being a wild few days in that city, with the manhunt for the bombers, the shootout, and the eventual capture of Johar Tsarnaev. What was it like?
Well, you know, Sam, this was the biggest terror act in the United States since 9/11, and certainly, to say the least, was absolutely tragic and of course unexpected. And I think one of the bigger things that people learned from it was that this sense of security that we've kind of become accustomed to sort of in the United States, this pretend sometimes sense of security because of the measures that are put in place all over the country that kind of tell us that a lot of is being done to make sure these terrible things don't happen. This bombing showed people, I think, this year that nothing is as secure and safe as it feels in this day and age. And certainly it was just a very tragic, sad event. And the city of Boston has certainly recovered. But when we were there for about 10 days, it was really just really sad. And everybody was able to kind of communicate because, again, terrorism is, you know, something that that happens in a particular nation. It's something that unfortunately is plaguing the entire world.
Yeah, and then Ramon, I want to bring you in. A few days after the Boston Marathon bombings, there was the explosion at the fertilizer plant in West Texas, killed 15 people, injured more than 200. You were there. What did you see on the ground in West Texas in those days afterward?
Yeah, this reporting that we did in West Texas, it was some of the most physically demanding and emotionally demanding that I've done in my career. I mean, it was a scene of utter destruction and despair when we initially arrived there in West Texas. We heard from the mayor of that tiny town, Tommy Muska, and he described the explosion as having a nuclear bomb being dropped on his town. Now, the night of the blast when we arrived only a couple of hours after it happened, and we were kept a little distance away from the fertilizer plant. It was still on fire, but even miles away you could see blown out windows, buildings badly damaged. And once the fire was put out and we were able to get a little bit closer to where the blast originated from, it was just a crater more than 90 feet wide. We could see schools which were completely destroyed, fire trucks, a mangled mess, playgrounds just reduced to rubble. And all the while, talking to the people of this town, which has a population of about 3,000 people. So everybody knows each other there. A lot of people knew the victims, and they talked to us in the aftermath. Let's hear from them.
The windows were blown in, and on where I was at in the room with my kids. So we don't know the extent of the damage. The house lifted up, and I grabbed my kids, and we were headed out the door of the hallway and the room, and just heard an explosion, and the windows blew in and everything. We fell to the floor, and we waited until it stopped. And we got up, and I got my other daughter and my mom that was in the living room with my stepdad, and we ran outside because the house was smelling like gas.
Yeah, and a lot of people still in mourning, some people still living in rentals. Other people are in the process of rebuilding, but for a lot of those people living in that tiny town, 2013 was unfortunately a year to forget for them, a very rough one.
Ramon, I want to switch gears here. This has also been a year filled with protests, just like the last few years have been. And a few issues generated as much popular revolt as the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal being negotiated throughout the year. You covered many of these protests out in California. What impact have they made?
That's right. We've covered protests, TPP protests here in Beverly Hills, Los Angeles, and even up in Utah. And there has been a lot of grassroots efforts to put this trade negotiation on hold. And so far, it appears to be successful because we're not just seeing opposition at the grassroots level. Many people in Congress are really concerned about the Obama administration's goals to move the TPP forward and to really fast-track it to Congress. We have to remember that the Obama administration really wanted to have this deal, which encompasses 12 nations, done by the end of this year. But it appears that the negotiators from all the countries involved haven't been able to come up with something that they all can agree on. So in 2014, you can expect to see more protests against the PPP, and many people in D.C. really questioning whether this is in the best interest of the United States and the other countries involved.
Right, just one of many big stories this year brought to us by great correspondents covering them. RT correspondent Liz Wall in our D.C. studio, Anastasia Churkina from New York, Ramon Galindo from L.A. Thank you all.
Thank you.
You bet.